It's easy to get nostalgic about the music we remember from our childhood. Every generation thinks their music was the pinnacle, but all music, even pop, is constantly evolving. We'll explore the different shapes that pop music has taken over the years, and explore its evolution into the music we listen to today. Make sure to turn up your speakers and hit subscribe for more videos from the Taco. Let's get started. Unlike other genres of music, pop music is a bit more difficult to define. There was once a time when it simply meant whatever music was popular at the time, but eventually it became its own entity. Pop music was created to appeal to as wide of an audience as possible, and some people believe that makes it a simple, shallow type of music. But a ton of work goes into carefully crafting the perfect song that will both make people want to get up and dance and fit in with the zeitgeist of the time in which it's released. We also frequently hear themes of love, loss, and experiencing life, which are subjects tackled by all genres of music and experienced by almost everyone. Now that we've sang the praises of pop music a bit, let's look at its roots. We'll go back to the 1950s, when the music of the previous decade, primarily swing and Motown, was giving way to rock and roll. As rock and roll became more popular, pop was being defined and created by producer Mitch Miller. Miller was working for Columbia Records, which was prestigious even back then. He had access to all of the big-name artists at the time, and thus wasn't limited to just one single genre. He was able to take aspects from country, blues, folk music, and more, and combine them with that rock and roll music that all the kids were listening to. The sound was a huge departure from the orchestral-focused songs of the previous decades. Artists like Johnny Ray, Frankie Laine, and Guy Mitchell all worked with Miller on this new and rapidly evolving form of music. And of course, in 1953, we were introduced to the now iconic Elvis Presley. Pop music may have started taking shape in the 50s, but according to research, it really got started in the 1960s. One team from the Queen Mary University of London and Imperial College London analyzed over 17,000 songs from the US Billboard Hot 100. They found that there were three revolutions that took place in pop music. The first took place in 1964, the second in 1983, and the third in 1991. Pop music was always intended to be marketed towards teens and young adults, and in the 60s, portable radios made it even easier for them to listen. Pop music could now be heard all over, picking up influences from various places. There were the Beach Boys from the beaches of California, and a little band you might have heard of from Britain called the Beatles. It was the British invasion, with bands like the Rolling Stones and the Dave Clark Five. In the early 60s, researchers noted that chords known as dominant sevenths, which were popular in jazz and blues music, started to decline in popularity. Instead, the British bands brought an entirely new sound overseas, marking the first new phase in pop music. The 60s were a time when we started to first see subgenres of pop start to crop up. This includes bubblegum pop, which is marked by its upbeat sound, and is what many people first think of when they hear the phrase pop music. Think bands like the Monkees and the Archies. There's also Baroque pop, which blended pop, rock, and Baroque music together. These are bands like the Beatles, the Bee Gees, and the Kinks. Before we knew it, those subgenres were replaced by mixes of punk rock and pop in the 1970s. This power pop was utilized by bands like the Romantics and Cheap Trick. Country music stars were realizing the power of pop music and adapting their music to appeal to wider audiences. But the most well-known change of this era is the punk rock song. Many favorite classic artists like the Jackson 5, Queen, and Elton John got started singing songs that are still popular to this day. It seems like the public's desire for pop music was reaching a fever pitch, and audiences just couldn't get enough of their favorite pop bands. One fascinating aspect of the evolution of pop music is the role that technology plays. In the 1980s, pop music hit its next major stylistic revolution, thanks in part to digital recording. New technology was rapidly emerging, and this included things like synthesizers, samplers, and those drum machines that everyone loves to hate. The synthesized and electronic sounds caused the next major shift to occur in 1983. In addition to creating the genre of dance pop, it's also the reason we have other genres like techno music. The artists that became famous during this decade are now legends. Michael Jackson's Thriller is the best-selling album to this day. Of course, we also have the late, great Prince as well. His music drew inspiration from pop, rock, funk, and many more genres. Combine that with his incredible creativity creativity and stage presence, and it's no wonder he was such a huge hit. And of course, we also met some of the long-lasting female powerhouses of pop, like Whitney Houston and Madonna. However, there was a negative aspect to pop music in the 1980s. Arena rock became a huge hit and totally dominated the charts. This includes performers like Bon Jovi and Bruce Springsteen. These artists may have packed stadiums, but they also meant that the pop genre was suddenly desperately lacking in diversity. In the 1990s, we had even more girl power as we saw girl groups like the Spice Girls start to emerge. Not only were these girls a hugely successful female pop group, but they were the biggest commercially successful British group since the Beatles. And who could forget the classic boy bands that we've all come to know and love, such as Backstreet Boys and NSYNC. The third major melodic shift occurred in 1991, and it was the biggest one yet. It happened when rap and hip-hop finally went mainstream. Because these genres traditionally don't use much in the way of harmony, this was a huge change in the music most people listen to. Instead of harmonies, we received a ton of music that emphasized speech and rhythm. Because mainstream pop music had grown so overall stagnant in the 1980s, many people credit the 1990s with totally revitalizing pop music. Now, we know that each generation of people thinks that their music was the very best. But you have to admit that many people just get super nostalgic about pop music from the 1990s. What was it that was so magical about this period of time? Why do we get so hyped whenever we hear Christina Aguilera singing about being a genie in a bottle? You're not wrong if you think that there's something special about 90s pop music. According to music psychologist Daniel J. Levitin, around the age of 14, we humans get a surge of pubertal growth hormones. This makes everything we experience at the time seem so much more important and vivid than it is in reality. As a teenager, we're working on forming our own identities, so things like what songs we listen to seem like a huge deal. Researchers from Cornell University started looking into this due to the success of the Millennium album by the Backstreet Boys. They found that during the first 2 decades of life, people had the highest emotional connections with music, and this connection carried on through adulthood, because music forms a strong connection to our memories. So the takeaway from all of this is if you loved rocking out to Britney Spears when you were a teenager, you're always going to want to hear her songs one more time. Your music isn't actually better from a historical or evolutionary standpoint. That's just how you happen to remember it. And that's true whether you grew up in the 70s, 80s, 90s, or whether you're under 20 years old now. It seems like since we hit the 2000s, the sky's the limit when it comes to pop music. There are tons of different subgenres at this point, each with its own flair and dedicated fan base. Power pop made a comeback with bands like Blink-182, Fall Out Boy, and Simple Plan. We also have the hip-hop and R&B influences showing through with artists like Rihanna and Beyonce. Then there's the electronic music we love from Lady Gaga and similar artists. You now have everyone from Ariana Grande to Justin Bieber coming up with hit songs. And it might take a music expert to categorize their sound. Although it's now harder than ever to define what exactly pop music is, we think that's actually a good thing, because there is so much more variety. There's no denying that there are more different sounds in music than ever before. Just keep in mind, if you feel like the music you loved growing up was the best, everyone else does too, no matter what decade you grew up in. Now that we know about the sounds and bands that marked major milestones in pop's history, let's talk about content. Despite sounding wildly different through the years, pop music tends to follow certain themes when it comes to its lyrics. Many people like to claim that pop music is shallow, but it's actually gotten quite a bit more explicit and loquacious as time goes on. However, the core themes of pop music have remained shockingly unchanged. Artists from the Beatles to Drake frequently use the words love, good, like, and life. In the 1970s, it was common to hear words relating to disco, such as boogie, while pop hits in the 2000s and 2010s would use the word club, as well as some colorful language we can't share on this channel. This correlates with the addition of hip-hop and rap into mainstream music. These genres were initially mostly about violence, but over time became more focused on romance, relationships, and intimate acts. It'll be exciting to see where society and technology take the evolution of pop music next. If you thought that the portable radios of the 60s changed the game, just consider all of the technology we now have at our disposal. Many of us remember desperately trying to record songs off the radio onto a cassette tape, or burning CDs for our friends. Now, it's simple to get a subscription-based service like Pandora or Spotify and have unlimited access to unlimited music. Just by opening up YouTube or Apple Music, we can listen to pretty much anything we could ever want. In fact, we now consume the vast majority of our media entirely digitally, but we still won't be able to help being smitten with the music we grew up with. Our memories aren't stored in one centralized location in the brain. They're all over the place. Accessing our memories takes utilizing various cognitive structures, but a single song can activate them. Listening to a song that you associate a memory with is the closest you'll ever get to reliving the past. Some people may try to hate on pop music by claiming it all sounds the same. Researchers can actually measure diversity in pop music, and they've discovered that it's only increasing over time. Their analysis didn't show an overall trend when it comes to composing music, and there's definitely no lack of diversity here. The harmony, chords, timbres, and even content matter of music are constantly changing and evolving. Nostalgia factor aside, what is your favorite decade of pop music? Tell us your thoughts about pop music in the comment section. Thanks for watching.